We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation about the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done. Psalm 78, verse 4. Lean in closer. There is a story that must be told, a story 130 years in the making, and you need to witness it. Right here, in the heart of the College Place community in Columbia, South Carolina, something extraordinary has been happening. For more than a century, while the world turned and history unfolded, Bethlehem, being one of the many black churches in Columbia, stood as more than a building. It became a force, a refuge, a place of prayer and praise. This is Bethlehem Baptist Church College Place, and what you're about to witness is the story of a family who built something that could not be broken. In 1896, Father Elijah Johnson stood on a piece of earth in Richland County near what is now known as Coon Road. The land had been purchased from Henry Wiley for $50, and the people came. They came because as former slaves, they needed a place to belong, a place to worship freely, a place where their souls could rest after the weight of the week. And so, under that brush arbor, Bethlehem Baptist Church College Place was born. Tony Anderson, chairman of the Deacon Board. F. Anderson, Boyd Ruff, Deacon Perry, Henry Bell, Shaq Gadsden, and Dose Gadsden. These were the first church officers, men who carried the weight of leadership with humility and strength. And the mothers, Fanny Anderson, Ida Gadsden, Becky Wiley, Nancy Woodard, and Jane Bell. These women were the backbone, the prayer warriors, the ones who held the community together when everything else threatened to fall apart. For 22 years, Father Elijah Johnson shepherded this flock, and when he was called to serve another church in 1918, the work continued. Reverend Harry Corbett, Sr., the associate pastor, stepped into leadership in 1919 and carried the torch until 1921. In 1922, a new shepherd arrived at Bethlehem. His name was Reverend Eddie J. Gallman. And for 16 years, he would lead this congregation with steady hands and an unshakable faith. Under his leadership, the church continued to grow. The deacon board expanded to include W.M. Corbett and Midas Counts. The church mothers were Mary Days and Maggie Smith. They stood as pillars of prayer and wisdom. But Reverend Gallman's legacy would reach far beyond the walls of Bethlehem. In 1917, just 5 years before he took the pulpit, a daughter was born to him. Her name was Edna, and from the moment she could speak, she could sing. At just 3 years old, little Edna Gallman stood up at one of her father's revivals and sang. The congregation knew immediately this child had been touched by God. She would grow into one of the most beloved gospel voices of her generation. Known across the country as the Sweetheart of the Potomac, Edna Gallman Cook recorded classics like Stop Gambler and her signature hit Heavy Load, a song that carried her name into homes, churches, and radio stations nationwide. Her voice full of melisma, emotion, and unmistakable conviction became a defining sound of mid-century gospel music. But no matter how far she traveled, her roots remained here, in College Place, at Bethlehem. When she passed away in 1967, the world came home with her. Her funeral, held at Second Nazareth Baptist Church, was unlike anything Columbia had ever seen. The newspaper described it as outgoing, dramatic, overflowing with emotion, a service so large it spilled into the streets. Nearly 8,000 people gathered. Fans, choirs, pastors, gospel greats, and everyday people who had been moved by her voice. They packed the sanctuary, crowded the sidewalks, and stood shoulder to shoulder just to say goodbye. The music shook the walls. Choirs wept as they sang. Mourners shouted, praised, and cried out as if they were inside one of her own concerts. It was a homegoing worthy of a woman whose voice had carried the gospel across the nation. And when the final song faded, Edna Goldman Cook was brought back to the place where her story began, laid to rest behind Bethlehem Baptist Church, in the same cemetery where her father rests, among her people. The Goldman family is connected to the Thompson brothers, Reverend Albert and John Thompson, another thread in the tapestry of faith woven through this community and a living piece of Bethlehem history. Reverend Goldman served Bethlehem until 1938. When he passed away years later in Washington, D.C., his funeral was held at Bethlehem Baptist Church on Lyon Street, conducted by Reverend O.G. Odom, and he was brought home once again to be buried in the Bethlehem Baptist Church College Place Cemetery. When Reverend Ben Kelly stepped into leadership in 1938, Bethlehem Baptist Church was already a pillar in the College Place community. His tenure was brief, ending in 1940, but the church he shepherded was alive with purpose. Then came 1942, a year that would test the soul of Bethlehem. A fire swept through the sanctuary, reducing the church to ashes. For many communities, that kind of loss would have been the end. But for Black churches, especially in the Jim Crow South, fire was not new, loss was not new, and rising again was part of the story. Bethlehem did what Black churches have always done. They gathered, they prayed, and they rebuilt. In 1943, Reverend T.H. Hughes stepped forward to lead the rebuilding effort. Under his guidance, the foundation of a new sanctuary began to rise, brick by brick, prayer by prayer. He reignited the flame of hope that the fire tried to extinguish. It would be his successor, Reverend Cyril S.M. Hightower, who carried the work to completion. Serving until 1952, Reverend Hightower shepherded Bethlehem through a season of restoration. He not only rebuilt a sanctuary, he helped restore a sense of identity and belonging for a Black community that needed its church more than ever. Reverend Hightower was not just a pastor, he was a presence. Born in Edgefield County, he brought with him a deep well of compassion, conviction, and community-minded leadership. His ministry reached into every corner of College Place. He preached with fire, prayed with power, and walked these streets like a shepherd who knew every sheep by name. And the people remember him. They remember the pastor who didn't mind getting his hands dirty. They remember the man who would pull up in his pickup truck on hot summer days, the back loaded with watermelons, selling melons not for profit, but for fellowship, for connection, for community, because that's who he was, a pastor who stayed close to the people. But his ministry stretched far beyond College Place. Newspaper records show Reverend Hightower standing in some of the heaviest rooms in South Carolina, serving as a spiritual advisor during executions at the state prison. When others stepped back, he stepped forward, offering last rites, whispering final prayers, holding the hands of men and women in their final moments. He believed every soul deserved dignity. Every person deserved a pastor. His leadership also extended into the civic and social life of Columbia. During his tenure, Bethlehem Baptist Church, under Reverend Hightower's guidance, participated in a major interdenominational pageant to raise funds for the Good Samaritan Waverly Hospital, one of the most important Black hospitals in South Carolina. Bethlehem's involvement placed the church at the heart of a citywide effort to strengthen Black healthcare, proving once again that Reverend Hightower's ministry reached far beyond the pulpit. Even after his time at Bethlehem ended, he never stopped serving the community he loved. In the 1950s and 1960s, Reverend Hightower became a civic leader, helping guide efforts to incorporate what would have been the Eastwood community, a neighborhood built by working-class Black families fighting for self-determination and protection from forced annexation. Eastwood would have stretched across the quiet roads of Fry Road, Alida Street, Stevenson Avenue, and down toward the Southern Railway tracks, a small but determined neighborhood tucked between Farrow Road, Colonial Drive, and Wilson Boulevard. When he passed away at age 77, his funeral was held at Bethlehem Baptist Church, the very sanctuary he helped rebuild, with burial in Piney Grove AME Church Cemetery in Blythewood. His life touched families across states, but his heart always remained in College Place. Reverend Cimaril M. Hightower not only completed a sanctuary, he completed a chapter in Bethlehem's and College Place's story. After Reverend Hightower's season of rebuilding and restoration, Bethlehem entered a quieter but meaningful chapter under Reverend Rose, who served from 1952 to 1954. His tenure may not be widely documented, but the world around Bethlehem was shifting, and the church stood in the middle of it. During Reverend Rose's leadership, Richland County launched major public health campaigns across Black neighborhoods, urging families to get tested, stay informed, and protect one another. More than 20,000 residents participated in countywide blood testing efforts, and Bethlehem, as it had always done, opened its doors. Reverend Clarence Harrell stepped into leadership next, guiding Bethlehem through the mid-1950s. Though the written record of his tenure is brief, Reverend Harrell continued the steady work of nurturing the congregation, strengthening ministries, and keeping Bethlehem rooted in its mission, to edify God while liberating the body, mind, and soul. In 1954, Reverend Moses Thomas became our chief servant. He served until 1958. Reverend Malachi M.J. Odom Jr. stepped into Bethlehem's story during the early 1960s, a decade when America was shifting beneath everyone's feet. Born in Denmark, South Carolina, the son of Malachi Sr. and Margaret Bussey Odom, he carried with him a deep pastoral heritage and a quiet, steady strength shaped by years of service. Reverend Odom was also part of a remarkable pastoral lineage. He was the brother of Reverend G.J. Odom, the beloved pastor of Bethlehem Baptist Church on Lion Street, where he served faithfully for more than 35 years. Two brothers, each leaving a legacy in their own corner of the city, yet bound by the same calling and the same family name. When Reverend Odom arrived at Bethlehem, the nation was entering one of the most turbulent eras in its history. Yet in the midst of social upheaval, he became a steady, grounding presence. His leadership bridged the gap between tradition and transformation, guiding Bethlehem through a season when the world outside was loud, uncertain, and rapidly changing. Under Reverend Odom, Sunday school grew, families multiplied, and Bethlehem remained what it had always been: a safe place, a strong place, a place where the community could gather, breathe, and believe. Though the written record of his years here at Bethlehem is limited, the legacy of Reverend M.J. Odom Jr. is woven into the continuity of Bethlehem's story. He carried the torch faithfully, ensuring that the church remained rooted and spiritually nourished until it was time to pass that torch to the next leader. His ministry preserved the strength of Bethlehem during a pivotal moment in history, allowing the church to move confidently into the next chapter God was preparing. When he passed in December of 1992, the community remembered him as a devoted shepherd who helped steady the flock during a defining era. In 1962, Reverend Lorenza L.Z. Chavis became pastor of Bethlehem Baptist Church. His time was short, but his impact was lasting. He served faithfully until his passing in 1965, pouring himself into the work of ministry with a devotion that touched every corner of the community. Under Reverend Chavis's leadership, plans were designed for our present education building, a sign of his forward-thinking spirit and his commitment to preparing Bethlehem for the next generation. Even in a brief tenure, he was building for the future. Reverend Chavis was a working pastor in every sense of the word. He held a full-time job at Powell's Garage. He led the Crossroad Elementary School PTA. He served as superintendent of the Colonial Creek Sunday School Union. He also pastored St. Mark Baptist Church in Fairfield County, all while shepherding Bethlehem with compassion, strength, and humility. He was a man who carried multiple communities on his shoulders, yet still found the energy to pour into his Bethlehem family with conviction and love. But his story and his service would end in a way no one expected. On a Thursday evening, while standing in the pulpit of Bethlehem Baptist Church, preaching the gospel he loved, Reverend L.Z. Chavis was suddenly stricken. Right there among the people he served. We still have a few members here that were present that very night. The newspaper called it simply, "Minister dies holding service." But for Bethlehem, it was far more than a headline. It was the passing of a shepherd in the very act of feeding his flock. In the days that followed, the community gathered to honor him. His funeral was held at Mount Pilgrim Baptist Church on Highway 601, with ministers from across the region standing in support. Members of the clergy, officers of Bethlehem, and leaders from St. Mark Baptist Church served as honorary pallbearers, a testament to the respect he earned in life and the love he left behind. Reverend Lorenzo Chavis did not leave this world in defeat. His final moments were not a tragedy. They were a testimony. His legacy does not end in 1965. It lives in the education building he envisioned. It lives in the ministries he strengthened and the many families he touched. It was not until 1967 that the education building finally rose from blueprint to reality. And it happened under the steady, determined leadership of Reverend Edward Johnson, who became pastor after Reverend Chavis's passing and guided Bethlehem through the late 1960s. Reverend Johnson stepped into Bethlehem at a pivotal moment. The church was grieving the lamentable loss of a beloved pastor. The community was changing, and the nation was in the middle of the civil rights era. Yet Reverend Johnson brought with him a calm strength, a teacher's heart, and a reputation that would only grow in the years to come. He would later rise to become president of the South Carolina Baptist Educational and Missionary Convention, one of the most powerful and historic Black Baptist bodies in the state, a convention that has shaped pastors, churches, and Christian education across South Carolina for more than a century. And his story connects directly to Bethlehem's present. Before coming to Bethlehem, and years before our current pastor would take the helm, both men pastored the historic Morris Chapel Baptist Church of Greenwood, South Carolina. Two pastors, two eras, one sacred pulpit. A shared spiritual lineage that ties Bethlehem's past to its present in a way only God could orchestrate. Reverend Johnson served Bethlehem faithfully until 1969, when he resigned to continue the broader work God had placed in his hands, work that would impact churches across the entire state.
Bethlehem Baptist Church is a strong church, and we're growing, and we give God all praises. No one individual in the Bethlehem Church has caused the growth. We just done what the Lord has asked us to do, and He promised to give the increase.
On the 16th of May, 1969, Bethlehem Baptist Church called a new shepherd, a young pastor, a visionary, a man whose voice carried both authority and compassion. His name was Reverend Dr. C. Allen Falk, and for the next 3 decades, he would shape Bethlehem in ways no one could have imagined. He came from Columbia soil, born and raised right here in the city, the son of Reverend and Mrs. E.M. Falk Sr., a husband to the former Alberta Thomas, a father to Charles Cena, Charles Jr., and Leon. A man whose life was rooted in faith, family, and service. Prior to Bethlehem, he was a faithful member of St. John Baptist Church and was Reverend Roscoe Wilson's youngest son in the ministry, being licensed at 15 years old. He was educated at C.A. Johnson High School, a proud adult education graduate of Columbia High School, Benedict College School of Religion, and received his Doctorate of Humanities degree from Preston College. As a professional farrier, he even studied animal science at the University of Georgia. He was the proud owner of C.A. Falk Metalcraft. He was a man who moved with purpose. And when he stepped into Bethlehem, the church was small, just 90 members. But Reverend Falk didn't see what it was. He saw what it could be. Under his leadership, Bethlehem grew to more than 1,600 members. The church continued being a force in College Place, a spiritual anchor for the entire community. Reverend Falk believed deeply, "Our church is not judged by its size, but by its willingness to fulfill God's will." And he lived that truth every day. Under his leadership came some of Bethlehem's greatest accomplishments: a new sanctuary, seating 1,000 people, a new baptismal pool, central air conditioning, additional property, the Wiley Kennedy Family Life Center, a paved parking lot, a new bus, a commercial kitchen, a garage for Boy Scouts, vans, and buses, a state-of-the-art sound system, an elevator, and so much more. He didn't just pastor Bethlehem. God, with the help of Reverend Falk and the BBC family, cultivated Bethlehem. And he cultivated something else, something that carried Bethlehem's name far beyond Columbia: the C.A. Falk Singers. A powerhouse gospel group born right here under his leadership, started out singing as a group of a handful of teenagers before ending its tenure as a choir of over 50+ voices. They traveled the country, singing with fire and conviction, carrying the spirit of Bethlehem into churches and cities across America. And they recorded an album that became part of Bethlehem's musical legacy, Move the Mountain. Their voices became the soundtrack of a growing church, a sound that carried Bethlehem's story wherever they went. Reverend Falk also raised pastors and preachers, sons of the church, who began their ministry journeys under his leadership, too many to name. His influence reached pulpits across the state and beyond. For 3 decades, Reverend Falk led Bethlehem with a servant's heart, and then came his final Sunday. The last sermon he ever preached at Bethlehem was about the large scope of Christian service, a message that stretched beyond the walls of the church and into the civic responsibility of every believer, not as politics, but as stewardship, as a witness, and as a moral duty. 2 days later, on Election Day morning, Reverend passed away. A pastor who had spent his life teaching his people to serve left this world on the very day he had urged them to make their voices heard. Bethlehem did not simply lose a pastor. It lost a father, a builder, a shepherd. A news article reporting Reverend Falk's death stated that he was a man with a big heart who was always sharing, yet carried a no-nonsense spirit that shaped Bethlehem. He taught his children and congregation to follow the narrow path of proper behavior, hard work, and service to others. We have always been, and remains, a voice for justice, for dignity, and for the sacred right to vote. From brush arbor beginnings to modern-day ministry, Bethlehem has stood on the front lines of civic engagement, community empowerment, and the belief that faith must speak, faith must act, and faith must show up. Reverend Falk preached it with his last sermon, and Bethlehem still lives it today. We entered a tender and uncertain season, and yet, even in grief, Bethlehem did what it had always done. It kept moving forward. To guide the church through this transition, Bethlehem called Reverend Dr. M.C. Fennell to serve as interim pastor. He stepped into the role with steadiness and compassion, helping the congregation heal while keeping the ministry strong. His leadership carried Bethlehem through the early months of a new millennium, a time of reflection, rebuilding, and preparation for what God would do next. But during his tenure, Reverend Fennell became ill, and once again, Bethlehem needed someone to stand in the gap. That someone was Reverend Henry Spann. For 18 months, Reverend Spann led Bethlehem with a servant's spirit. He preached, he prayed, he studied the church, and under his leadership, Bethlehem did something remarkable. It grew. Even in a season of transition, even without a permanent pastor, Bethlehem gained new members, a testament to the strength of the church and the faithfulness of Reverend Spann's leadership. Reverend Spann was not just filling a role, he was shaping a moment in Bethlehem's history. He became a bridge between eras, honoring the legacy of Dr. Falk while preparing the congregation for the next chapter God was writing. His presence, his leadership, and his faithfulness made him an essential part of Bethlehem's story. These years were brief, but they mattered. And because of leaders like Reverend Fennell and Reverend Spann, Bethlehem was ready for the next pastor, the next vision, the next move of God.
Turn around and give your neighbor a high five and say, neighbor, I got joy this evening. Neighbor, you don't know how Jesus set me free. You don't know how he gave me a recall in my life. Ain't God all right? Let me hear this evening. Say it! Say it! Say it! Yeah!
A young, short, fiery black preacher with a booming voice, hailing from Greenwood, South Carolina, by way of Maxton, North Carolina, stepped into Bethlehem's story at the dawn of a new century. His name was Reverend Dr. Anthony A. McCallum, and when he walked through the doors of Bethlehem Baptist Church in December of 2001, he didn't come quietly. He came with his sleeves rolled up, a servant's heart, and a voice that could shake the rafters and stir the soul. Officially installed in February of 2002, he immediately became known as the little man with the big voice. But that voice carried far more than volume. Raised by loving, God-fearing parents, Mr. and Mrs. Paul McCallum, he grew up in the church. Shallow Baptist in Maxton, Star of Bethlehem in Laurinburg. A man of both spirit and scholarship, Dr. McCallum earned his Bachelor of Arts from Shaw University, his Master of Divinity from Andersonville Theological Seminary, where he graduated magna cum laude, and his Doctor of Ministry from the Interdenominational Theological Center of Morehouse School of Religion, again magna cum laude, receiving the Benjamin Elijah Mays Award for Scholarly Leadership. His studies carried him across the world from South Africa to Ghana, shaping him into a preacher, a teacher, a theologian, and a global student of the gospel. In 1990, he met the love of his life, Angela Marie Holland of Shelby, North Carolina. Together, they built a family grounded in faith, raising two children, Tiffany and Anthony II, and now cherishing their grandson, Titus. First Lady Angela stands beside him with grace and strength, serving the church with a quiet power that complements his fiery voice. In 2002, he was elected pastor of Bethlehem, where he has led with passion, wisdom, and vision for more than 20 years. Under his leadership, Bethlehem grew in every direction spiritually, numerically, and structurally. He added a 7:45 a.m. worship service, a bold move that filled the sanctuary with early morning fire and drew believers from across the city. He strengthened the musical heartbeat of the church by elevating the sanctuary choir, shaping it into a powerhouse of sound that lifted worship to new heights. He reinstated the BBC praise dancers, restoring a ministry of movement and worship that had long been part of Bethlehem's identity. He revitalized youth music ministry by revamping the junior musical choir during a season of tremendous youth involvement, and by creating both the Sunshine Choir and the BBC Youth Choir, giving children and teens a place to grow, sing, and serve. Long before the flood of 2015 or the global shutdown of 2020, Dr. McCallum launched Bethlehem's live stream ministry, a prophetic decision that ensured the gospel would continue to reach the world no matter the season. Under his leadership, Bethlehem moved from selling cassette tapes to producing CDs and DVDs, modernizing the entire media ministry. He upgraded the sanctuary's technology, replacing outdated equipment with adding new digital displays and enhanced audio-visual systems that brought worship into a new era of excellence. He expanded Bethlehem's impact beyond the sanctuary walls by enhancing the Bethlehem Food Pantry, a ministry that continues to feed and support the community with dignity and compassion. He helped establish the Wiley Kennedy Foundation, extending Bethlehem's legacy of service, education, and empowerment throughout the city. Pastor McCallum's ministry also extended beyond the pulpit and into the civic life of the nation. In 2008, during his first run for President of the United States, Senator Barack Obama was invited to Bethlehem Baptist Church, welcomed by Dr. McCallum as part of a historic moment in American politics. 12 years later, in 2020, Dr. McCallum again opened Bethlehem's doors to a future president, welcoming Joe Biden during his first run for the presidency. Bethlehem expanded its reach through ministries designed to meet the needs of the whole person: the ministry of the hearing impaired, couples ministry, mime ministry, veterans ministry, mental health ministry, intercessory prayer ministry, children's church, noonday Bible study, men's and women's Bible studies, seniors Bible study, youth ministry, and the 30 over 30 youth Bible study. Reverend McCallum has written training booklets for deacons and deaconess, strengthening the leadership pipeline of the church and preparing future generations for service. The church grew spiritually. It grew physically as the campus transformed, culminating in the 2018 remodel that refreshed the sanctuary and prepared Bethlehem for the next generation. And when COVID-19 swept across the world, threatening churches everywhere, Bethlehem, under Dr. McCallum's steady hand, stood firm. The church adapted, worshiped, stayed connected, and survived through a literal pandemic. Here at Bethlehem, we love our pastor, and we honor his work on continuing the legacy of Bethlehem, staying rooted and grounded in the work of God and his people. We look forward to celebrating 25 years of excellence in 2027. Today, Bethlehem continues to rise, a thriving, multi-generational church shaped by a vision that have carried the congregation into a new era of strength. This is Bethlehem Baptist Church, College Place, built by faith, sustained by grace, strengthened by struggle, anchored in hope, and carried by the God who has never failed us yet, 130 years behind us, eternity ahead of us. And the story continues. Come, see what God will do next.